have card instead of my phone because last time I had the phone I kept looking at it. So hey everybody, it's Carrow. I'm back for another video. I went ahead and got the poll from last Saturday on Twitter, and when I gave everybody the option between choosing to make a hero and working with mythologies, a large portion of people wanted to work with mythologies, which I'm actually super excited about because I love mythologies and I love working with mythologies and everything that goes into it. I would definitely like to be able to share, like what the fuck am I sharing? Definitely would love to be able to talk about all that with you. So, having said that, when we're working with mythologies, we can't just straight in dive into it. There's a couple of things that I would definitely like to point out to you. And so, one of the first things that you actually need to do when working with mythologies is you need to do research. And I don't mean go do a Google search and just kind of get the bare minimum. I mean, like, you really need to do some research about the mythology that you're working about, how it changed over time, because they do change. If you guys remember the video I did where I talked about creating villains and about how the concept of villains changed over time from mustache twisting evil to Thanos, mythologies actually change over time too, and the reason that they change over time is because society and the morals of society and the norms change over time, and so those stories change to kind of fit what's going on at that particular time. A lot of this happens because stories are supposed to be appealing to people, and if they don't change and they stay old-fashioned, then they get forgotten. So definitely take a look and see how it's changed over time. So when I'm talking about that, a really good figure to talk about would actually be the Morgan from Celtic mythology, and the Morgan changed in a way because originally the Morgan started as 3 people and then over time merged into 1. The Morgan used to be part of like prosperity, kings, and obviously the battle crow. So in my brain, I've always associated the Morgan with, I want to say, leadership, kingship, where today the Morgan is kind of represented by death and transformation and a whole bunch of other things. And I say a whole bunch of other things because at this particular moment, the idea of the Morgan is still very fluid and it's changing. And every time I try and talk to somebody that's actually in the pagan community, everybody has a very different idea, very perception of how the Morgan is, and that's a good example about how things change because of the way that people decide to interpret a particular person, a story, or an event. The other thing that you need to consider when you're working with mythologies is the culture that it's coming from. And I really want to hammer in on this because I've seen some people take a mythology from a culture that is not theirs and they write it really badly. You don't want to write this very badly, especially if you don't belong to that culture, because what's going to happen is you're going to piss off a lot of people and they're going to come after you and you're going to get discredited because, one, you didn't do your research, you did not understand what you were writing, and then you did it in a very poor manner that decided to entice a very angry booktube mob after you. So last thing you want is booktube coming after you and saying that you're a freaking idiot, so don't do that. But when you're looking at the culture, another thing to consider is the symbolism that goes in there. A really good figure that I would one day like to write about, but I don't have the gall to right now, is a Nancy from African mythology. And the reason I don't have the gall to write about a Nancy is mostly because, one, I don't know enough about a Nancy to be confident in it, and two, a Nancy is a very beloved figure in African mythology, and kind of walking into that is like walking into a snake's nest. If I do it wrong, I'm gonna get bit. That's not where I want to go right now. However, I really love all the stories that involve a Nancy and the antics he gets up to and the things that he does. I think that he's a really amazing figure and he's very well deserved to be loved by a lot of different people who read up about him. Now, having said I talked about the culture and about representing it well, you also have to consider your relationship to that culture, because like I said, if you go ahead and you anger the mob to come after you, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to look at you and ask who you are. A really unfortunate good example about this is J.K. Rowling in one of her books when she wrote about skinwalkers, and she wrote it in such a way that the indigenous people of North America came after her, and like they were very upset about her depiction and how it was. And one of the things that they pointed out was that she was a British person writing about Native American mythology that she clearly didn't know enough about. You can save yourself a lot of grief when you actually really do your homework when it comes to the research, because if you show that you're knowledgeable about what it is that you're writing about, people are less inclined to come after you with pitchforks and torches. Now, when you do your research, because I'm going back to research because this is a really important thing, when you do your research, there's 2 different ways to actually learn about mythologies and folktales. One, you can go and you can read about them. There's a lot of free resources. I'll go ahead and I'll link them all down below about places, you know, it's got all the folktales and it's got like the God Checker, like there's a ton of online resources that you can look at. One of the things that I would tell you that you should do is you should go look up a local storyteller and attend one of their events. Storytelling is very interesting because it has a way to actually bring the story to life in a way that's outside of the written word. Like, there's something about that suspense and the atmosphere that's created by a storyteller that I think should be at least appreciated a couple of times. Not to mention that they have their own interpretation of how the story should play out, and they always like it when you come over and you're kind of like, I thought that this was very interesting. I was just wondering about the motivation, about why you went from this when sometimes it's told this way. Don't actually challenge them, that's rude. Just kind of come over and have a conversation with them. You can find these guys pretty much anywhere. There's a storytelling community, there are like meetup groups, like there's all sorts of things. And the whole reason that I would tell you to go and find an actual storyteller and listen in on how they're going to tell you the story is because, one, you need to get out and make friends. You can't just stay in your house all day. You do need to socialize. It's good for you. It's good for your brain. You don't have to actually talk to all the people in the room, but maybe sit next to somebody, breathe the same air. Network. When you become an actual author, you are going to have to network, and people are going to ask why you're there, and you can say, well, I just want to do some additional research for my book, blah blah blah. People get super excited about this. So let's go ahead and talk about the common trends that I've seen in stories and mythologies and folktales. So first one, if you're going to do this and you want to be traditional, is if there's an old lady or an old guy who needs help, you stop everything and you go help that motherfucker. Because more than likely that is a god or some kind of magical entity who's out there to test a mortal, and if you do poorly, then they're gonna come and kill your families and kill all your pigs. And that happens pretty frequently where strangers come. They're usually old people, and if you don't help them or you don't share the food that you have that night, vengeance comes down onto you. Now, having said that, sometimes gods are very fickle creatures in these mythologies for various reasons, which I won't dive into right now. But sometimes one of the things that they do is they'll give you a boon or a gift. The gift comes with like a price. I'm trying to remember the details of this story. I was 6 when I heard it. I don't remember all of it, but I do remember, I know that it had to do with the origin of why the ocean is salty. And it started off with a man and a woman who were trying to get rice for the day. And they couldn't get and there wasn't a lot of rice for them to have, and so they always had to share it. And somebody knocked on their door one night and said, I really would just like a place to stay. Do you have room for me? And of course, this couple was very humble and they were very kind, and they said, yes, we would be more than happy to share our shelter and our food with you that night. And so the food, which was already very scarce for 2 people, was split 3 ways, and they gave the portion to the old person who came in. I can't remember if it was a man or woman. I think it was a man who came in, and allowed the stranger to sleep in their bed. So anyway, morning comes, the old person is gone, but in their place on the bed is this grinder, and there's a note that says, only grind this many times and then you can take what's left to market to sell. And so they didn't know what it was, and so they grinded it, and lo and behold, salt came out. And at the time of this story, salt was not a very common thing to have. And so they were able to make like a little bit of salt, and they took it to market and they sold it, and they bought enough food, not more. They bought enough food to be able to, sustain themselves for, the day. Right? And so they did this very so often. They still did their regular stuff and all that, but every now and then they would use a little grinder and salt would come out and they would go sell it. Well, somebody at market noticed that this couple was coming in with salt all the time, and so he followed them and said, I've noticed that you come in with this salt. Where do you get it? Well, the note didn't said that you couldn't tell anybody about it. And this couple, being very kind and wanting to be very giving, said, oh, well, we did this thing and this guy gave us this thing and it makes salt for us. But we can only do it so many times. That's what the note said. And the guy was like, oh, that's really interesting. So surpriser guy steals the thing in the middle of the night, and he goes out to this boat and he starts to grind it, and salt comes out, and he's super excited, right? Super excited. And he's like, cool. Well, he keeps spinning it more than he's supposed to. And then when he tries to stop, it won't stop. And he starts yelling at the box, like, no, stop it. What are you doing? I don't need this much salt. This is too much salt. Rah, 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 rah. Right? Well, boat sinks. He goes in with it. That grinder is still making salt, and that's, according to the story, why the ocean is salty. I can't remember what happened to the couple. I think they learned how to get salt from the ocean at that point. I'm not too sure. But this is a story I heard when I was 6 years old. I am 36 now. That was 30 years ago. I still remember the story. And that's one of the big perks about oral storytelling, is that it really is remembered, because if there's one thing that children do remember most, it's the stories that we tell to them when they're younger. So we're going to digress back to the themes I said I would mention. So we talked about helping old people and the consequences and the boons of helping old people. The other thing that I see frequent in mythologies and folktales is talking animals. If you are a fair person and you are out to do something good and a talking animal comes to help you, listen to whatever the fuck the animal is telling you, okay? And the animal's there to help you. I don't know why the animal's there. Sometimes it's sent by a god, sometimes the animal just happened to be there and be like, no, don't go left, go right. So go right. Just do whatever the talking animal tells you to do. Unless it's a fox, then you have to think about it. Or a coyote, unless it's one of those two. Then you have to consider your relationship with either wild foxes, or you have to think about your relationship with the actual coyote. And then some of these stories do have morals, they do have representation of the culture values at the time. Hansel and Gretel is definitely a very well-known story, which kind of reflected on the times where people couldn't have enough food to feed their family, so they would take their kids and ditch them out in the forest, and stuff would happen. Sometimes the children would live and sometimes they would starve to death. That was actually very common back then when people couldn't afford food. When food was scarce, they would like literally ditch their kids out in the woods. I'm having a thought. I can't remember what the fuck the thought was. I have to chase it. Where did it go? So you've done all the work, you're ready to go, you're ready to take this mythology and work it into your story. You already had the concept and you're about to charge forward with it. Awesome. Totally proud of you. Here's the thing that I'm going to tell you. Words from Carrow, not universal. So you can disregard it if you think I'm full of shit. That's totally legit. Be careful about how far you take your creative license with this mythology. When you get too far from the established norm, you create disbelief, and then disbelief turns into frustration, and frustration turns into somebody closing your book. You don't want your book to get closed. An example that I'm currently experiencing right now, and I am going to finish this book, but I had to walk away from it because it like really. But even though I intend to finish it, because it's the retelling of Hades and Persephone, but in the retelling of it, they're saying that Persephone is like this trollop flocking across the countryside and sleeping with random men looking for, you know, the perfect thrill. And that challenges a lot of things that I know about Persephone and a lot of my personal expectations. I still want to finish it because any retelling of Hades and Persephone is usually very appealing to me. I really like that story. It's a very favorite, and if you actually know some good ones, please like share them with me. I would love to read them. But that particular interpretation of it was just a little too far for me to like swallow at the moment. I'm still going to finish it. I don't know when, but maybe sometime in the year of 2019. Alright, so I said a lot of stuff at you. I do want to give you guys some good examples about some authors that I've encountered that actually took mythologies and worked them into their stories and did a pretty good idea. So the first author I can think of off the top of my head is actually going to be Jim Butcher, and I fortunately don't have a physical copy. I have all of his stuff either on Kindle or on Audible because, you know, I gotta listen to James, right? But he is really good. Like, he knows what he's doing when he writes his mythology. He has done stuff with Native Americans, he's done it with the Fae, he's got stuff in there about Bigfoot. I love how he depicts Christianity in his universe as well. Like, he knows what he's writing. He's a really good example about knowing what he's talking about and then depicting it in a way that is respectable. So if you're kind of curious about any of that, he's the guy that I would say to go to first. The next author who makes this list of really good examples is actually going to be Kevin Herne. Kevin Herne wrote the Iron Druid Chronicles, and his first 4 books I'm absolutely in love with. I own them all, but there's something about the first 4 books that I just absolutely it's just perfect for me. I really love a lot of what's going on in there. He's got lots of different mythologies. He's got very good interpretations of them. And his world building in these is really good. Anyway, this is the first book. If you're kind of interested and you would like a light, humorous read, this is a really good one. I would recommend that. And the next one, this is a young adult book, but it's called Thief Eyes. Thief Eyes is a really good one. This has to do with Icelandic mythology and working with all of that. And I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but it is very good. And it's also really engaging as well. When I used to be a teacher, I had this book in my classroom library, and I would always have a kid that would come in and pick it up and read it. And I never heard them say that they didn't like it or it was boring. Very good. I would highly recommend it. So these next 2 books that I have are actually books that I've had since I want to say 14. A lot of these have to do with, I want to say, the Fae, Celtic, and European mythologies. But the first one is Strands of Starlight. This has to do with like free towns and elves and kind of like how Christianity was coming in and, you know, basically making its mark. I really like it. It does have like some adult themes in it though. I don't mean sex, I mean like violence and assault and things like that. So if that's not something that you're into, then skip it. But I actually really like the story. I especially like how the heroine, it transforms from the beginning to the end. I think it's really good. Solid world building. Very good. And the next one I have right here, it's called The White Raven. And The White Raven, oh, I don't know how to talk about this book. This is why I don't do booktube. Definitely, it's got a huge mix of like realism and legend and mythology. It's got it all in there. And I think it's a really good book. Like, this is definitely like the book that if I had a fireplace and a hot cocoa thing, I would be reading this book right next to it. And it's such a really good story, especially if you're into like the fae. So anyway, that is literally all I have to say. I'm hoping that this is actually going to be a short video by the time I'm done editing it. Probably not. We'll see. So I'm going to have all those links for the books I talked about down below, along with some resources that you can use. I would definitely highly recommend that you give them a look at. And I would like to remind you all that because I love mythology and I write it in my own stories, if you'd like to see if I know what I'm talking about, I have a link to my own short story down below. You can either buy it for 99 cents or you can actually go ahead and read it for free by signing up for my newsletter. And then feel free, if you want to have a say in the future videos that are coming out. Like I said earlier at the start of the video, I do have a poll that I do once a week on Saturday on Twitter where I basically give you guys 2 to 3 options and then I pick the majority of the winner. The mythologies that I enjoy working with the most are usually European ones, but which ones do you enjoy working with, and why is it that you like to work with those ones in particular? Is it like the symbolism that's involved with it, the history? Does it like resonate with you in some way? I would really like to know, and I'd like to be able to share that with everybody else, because somebody may not hear about a mythology or a folktale that you've heard about and they would be interested in it and then they want to hear about it. So please feel free to share. This is still a discussion, a little place to chit chat. Yeah. So anyway, I'm done talking. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to like and subscribe to know when I'm coming out with future videos, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Something happened. Oh, you're gonna be late for work.